this computer. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the episode 97 of the Catholics Against Militarism podcast. Today on the show, I have Jason Knudson. Thanks for being on the show, Jason.
It's a pleasure. Nice to see you, Ellen.
Good to see you too. So I thought I could give my bio of you, and then if it's not correct, you can give your own bio. How does that sound?
Perfect. I'm happy to correct you.
Okay, so Jason Knudson is a deep state intelligence operative who has been sent into my life to get all the scoop on what's all the revolutionary ideas that are happening at Catholics Against Militarism, so he can try to destroy me. Is that right, Jason?
It's pretty accurate. We could just go with that, or I could give a little extra bio, maybe.
All right. Yeah, so Jason is actually a friend of mine. He's from my town in Colorado, and I don't know if you noticed, Jason, but I put an elk in my display here just for you.
That is amazing. I appreciate that.
I wanted you to feel at home. But I thought I would invite Jason on the podcast because he's a friend of mine. He's a veteran, and it's been a while since I've done a veteran interview, and I think those are important to do. And Jason and I think, have some different perspectives on things, and I think it might be interesting, fruitful to talk about a few contentious issues and just see where somebody else stands on these issues. So, and again, thank you for being on the show. Do you want to tell us what you really do, if I was wrong about that?
Right. So not deep state, not that I would tell the group, not a spy. Though I did spend 20 years in the military. I spent 10 years as an enlisted person, and then 10 years as an officer. I did special warfare, intelligence. I did do intelligence. I did submarines, and I did cybersecurity. And I ended up, the last thing that I did in the military before I left was I was doing technology scouting in Silicon Valley with a group called the Defense Innovation Unit. And then since then, I've been in several startups, some defense focused, some not. And currently, I am doing innovation consulting for large organizations like governments in the UK and the US mostly, and then also for startups. So it's really, how do those groups interact with each other? How do startups sell into large organizations? And how do large organizations adopt new technologies and new innovations?
Okay, so yeah, it sounds like a pretty impressive career. When did you enlist in the military?
I enlisted in 1998, straight out of high school. I had graduated high school with a very, very low GPA, though by all the testing metrics, I was a smart kid. So I fell into some of that crack where if I didn't do something that was rigorous and structured, that I probably wouldn't have made it through college. And so when I enlisted, I basically took it for a college fund so that I would be able to go to college, and enlisted for initially 4 years. And then I ended up liking it, and I ended up just continuing to say, hey, you know, the next time that I have to make a decision, I'll make the decision there. And 20 years later, I finally made the decision to retire, moved back home to Colorado, and that's the end of that story.
Okay. Yeah, if you were one of my high school students, I would just want to strangle you because I've had kids like you in my class, and I'm like, you're smart, but like you're not, they always say, you're not applying yourself.
That I could give you a list of all my report cards, and if you want to interview my mom at some point, she'll tell you exactly that.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like the military was a pretty good thing for you, though. Like it helped you to, I don't know, develop discipline. I don't know. What did it do for you? Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, my junior year, I got a large suspension from school for profanity over mass media. I was in a technology class. I'll save the details of that.
No, tell it. No, we want to hear the details. I want to hear the details. What does that mean?
Yeah.
There was no media. There was no media in the 1990s. Are you talking like the AV department where they would bring the cart in with like the TV and the VCR?
No. So the small town we come from had one of the first technology labs in the nation. It was kind of a pilot project, and we had things like robotics, we had things like computer programming, and one of my projects was web design, web development. And so I was coding websites very early on, and putting them up, and it was on the school intranet, right? Internal to school.
Oh,
Really,
no.
nobody had personal computers, nobody had phones, like cell phones, but you could still access it from anywhere else. And
Okay.
so I thought I was really smart, and I put a whole bunch of, high school profanity on black fonts with a black background so nobody could see it. But if you knew, you could highlight it and see everything.
Oh, no.
Well, I didn't realize that my teacher was smarter than I was and actually looked at the code. And when you look at the code, it just says, color black, and then the whole script that I'd written. So
Oh,
I, I'd had a series of these problems, and so my mother decided to send me to Valley Forge Military Academy, which,
okay.
if you've ever seen the movie Taps with Tom Cruise,
I haven't.
that maybe some of your viewers have. It's about a military school, and it's about the kids taking over the military school to prevent them from shutting the school down. That was my military school. Uh,
Oh,
yeah, it's in
okay.
Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. There never was a overthrow of the school by the students, though there are some very famous graduates. J.D. Salinger was a graduate from Valley Forge Military Academy,
Oh,
and General Schwarzkopf was also a graduate.
okay, cool. So then were you active in the wars at all in the 2000s?
Yeah, so I was active. I did a tour in Iraq, and I also did a tour in Afghanistan, and then I did another tour that was in support of the global war of terrorism in sort of the Mediterranean area.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I do like talking to people about war who have actually been there. I think I need to do a little bit more of that on my podcast. And
Yeah.
so you and I recently were having a conversation, and you said something to the effect of anti-Semitism is on the rise or something like that. And I said something to the effect of understandably, right? Not that I promote anti-Semitism. I do not believe in hating anyone for their religion or their genetics or their race or their ethnicity or anything like that. But it seems like opposition to the state of Israel and their actions right now is being conflated with anti-Semitism, and I don't think that's right to combine those two things. But just for the purposes of conversing, I just said, "Oh, well, understandably," and I was talking about the state of Israel. And I remember you got kind of quiet, and I said, "Oh, did I offend you?" And you said, "Well, I think you said I have friends who are Jewish," and I was like, "Oh yeah, I didn't mean it like that." And I was like, "You know what? Let's just stop this conversation right here and let's have this conversation on my podcast." Because I just had a feeling that we saw these things differently, and I was like, I just would love to hear a little bit more of why, obviously we're all opposed to anti-Semitism, as I defined it, hatred for a particular group of people. But it seemed that you might support or understand, Israeli position right now and what's happening over in the Middle East. And so I was wondering if you wanted to pick up that conversation where we left off, and explain a little bit about how you feel about that.
Yeah, there's nothing for hard conversations like having them in a very public venue. So I think we should go forward. But actually, I
Right.
think that the way you framed it, we're more in agreement than we are in opposition. We certainly come from different perspectives. But
Yeah.
I also agree that there's a difference between opposition for what a party state is doing, the state of Israel, and then there's a difference between, hatred for a group of people, anti-Semitism. And the problem is, though, in the general public, that that distinction is not clearly made, and sort of we're in a generation of identity politics, and so the fact that Israel has a lot of Jews in Israel,
Many of
um,
which do not support what the government is doing.
yes, well, so just sticking to this one
Mhm.
topic. Uh, there's a lot of people who don't make the distinction between the state of Israel and the Israeli Jewish people. And part of that is because of the mass migration of Jews into Israel and the way that, the impression that they're an occupied power. But it also goes back to general distrust of Jews globally, which is really a product of centuries of distrust to Jewish communities, which have been separate from the main communities in a lot of Western Europe. And it's really become an extension into Israel. And so if you look at the number of Israelis in, number of Jews in Israel compared to the number of Jews in the United States, those are about the same numbers. It's somewhere like 4 million people or something like that. I'm throwing a number out there. But the Jewish people are spread out all over the world. And sort of the unique thing about the Jewish community is the Jewish community is very supportive of its own community, and even exclusive of those who are not in the Jewish community. And that's not unique to Jews themselves, right? The Jewish people are not putting out something different than other communities, right? The Muslim community is the same way. The Catholic community is the same way. You've got, American exceptionalism. So Americans all over the world identify strongly with the United States. Chinese people identify with the Chinese. The Russians identify as Russian. Ukrainians identify as Ukrainians. There is a desire for communities that have similar customs and ceremonies to band together.
Right. Yeah, I don't think as many of those communities have the option for dual citizenship, though, in the same way that Jews do. I'm not sure that applies to like Chinese Americans, but I don't know how all that stuff works. But I think there is something a little unique about Jews, but it's interesting what you say, because I mean, I didn't really want to go too far down this rabbit hole about the whole anti-Semitism thing, but I see what you're saying. It seems though that it's almost like a horseshoe. It's like on this side you have people. Yes, there are bigoted people who will just dislike Jews because they're Jewish, and they therefore oppose Israel. And it really has nothing to do with the state of Israel and what the state of Israel is doing. It's just the fact that they're Jews is enough for them to oppose it. Okay, admittedly, there are some people like that. But then you go around the other horseshoe, and it's like the same place. There's people who support Israel simply because they are Jewish. And this is like the evangelical Christian community that is like, oh, it doesn't matter what they're doing. We have to blindly support them because of their race, religion, and ethnicity. Do you see what I mean? And so I think both of those positions are almost like equally problematic.
Well, that position is not, especially with the Christians supporting Jews in the Holy Land. That goes all the way back to the Crusades, right? That there's been a long history of Christians going in and trying to reclaim the Holy Land for the Christians, right? And we just need to look at the changeover of the Temple on the Mount from Christian to Jewish to Muslim control, multiple times over hundreds and hundreds of years, to see that it's always been a struggle. So this position of certain Christians that they're identifying with Christianity in the Holy Land and Jews as essentially Christians who haven't come to Christ yet, who haven't realized that the Messiah has come, right? There is an identification of sameness, right? The problem is that the Muslims get left out, which are an Abrahamic religion and do recognize Jesus Christ as a prophet, not necessarily as the Messiah. And all of them come from the same place. So this identifying that of the homeland and the battle for the homeland is not anything new, especially in the Christian community.
Right. Yeah, there is a history there. Although, yeah, in the last 20 years, the Christians have been decimated. Their population has been decimated in the Middle East. But when you were over there, I guess, well, do you have any strong feelings about the current situation in Gaza, what's been happening since October 7th? Like, I mean, I don't know if you want to speak. I know you were a philosophy major in college, so you can talk about this from a personal perspective, or we can just talk about it philosophically. But I was just wondering, if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, setting aside like the people who support Jews because they're Jews and people who don't like Jews because they're Jews, there's a lot of people in the middle that I would say are more can separate the ethnicity and the religion from the state and what the state is doing, and can separate the government and the state of Israel from the people of Israel, right? So that's what I'm talking about. So do you have any thoughts on that you want to share?
Yes. So we'll go into philosophy. I'm going to go history of philosophy real quick, right?
Okay. Yeah,
So
go
the
for it.
history of philosophy in modern philosophy really starts in Greece, right? Aristotle, Plato, those types of people, and it spread into Rome, and it spread around the world. And philosophy has largely been indistinct from religion. A lot of the purpose of philosophy was to understand the organization of the world, and for a large portion of time, philosophy was used to justify the existence of God, and that type of thought process was used both in religious means and in more secular ways. In the time of Newton and Descartes, that was where the actual split came between science and philosophy, where people started doing philosophy thinking for things that were not religious purpose. And those became separated, right? And so for a long time, your religion, that there's many different forms of philosophy, right? There's political philosophy, there's ethics, metaphysics, philosophy of language, philosophy of religion. But for a lot of times, those are all together. Those started splitting apart. So let's talk about a couple of different of these philosophies, because what's interesting is somebody will write a philosophy paper and then people will organize their society around those philosophy papers. So
Do you
good
have an
example.
example? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
good example is there is a famous paper written by the Greeks, Plato's The Republic.
Mhm.
And the Republic comes up with this idea that there are two groups of people, right? There are the people who work for a living, right? There's actually three groups. There's the people who work for a living, there's slaves, and then there are the philosopher kings. And the people who work for a living need to be free of their need to think about society. They need to be free to work and live and prosper in that way. At the same time, this group of philosopher kings need to be free from the needs of labor, right? They need to be free to think and organize society. And within that concept is this thing called the beautiful lie. And the beautiful lie is that people are born into one of those castes. That paper was written, over 1,000 years ago. But that one philosophy paper has led to the aristocracy in Europe. In fact, aristocracy. That led to the organization of the Catholic Church as it is modern day, with the Pope and the cardinals as princes, thinkers, and then the people get to work and free themselves from the need to think about this. Not to get too deep. And so what you saw in the late 18th century, the 1700s, is you saw the American Revolution, the French Revolution, people like Locke and Rousseau were talking about how to organize society in a way that was not based upon castes. It was based upon the rights of people. So what you see is an organization like the United States, France, England, which is where those philosophies came out of primarily, and now India is the largest democracy in the world, largely adopted those philosophical ideas that came from papers that were written and wrote them down on constitutions, and society is organized around them, right? And so there is a difference between a philosophical paper that's written and the human implementation of that paper. Just in religion, there's a difference between what is God's word, what's written in the Bible, and how people interpret that and how people action that. And so when I look at the conflict in the Middle East, I look at what documents are written and what do the documents say about ordering society. because there's philosophers in every single society that write papers that say how the society is going to be organized. So in the Middle East, the three dominant players in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are Israel, Palestine, and Iran. And there
Would you
is some,
include the United
Go ahead.
States in that because we support Israel and we're sending them all their bombs and stuff?
Well, when we talk about the philosophical basis of these organizations, right, we are looking at the documents that those societies write themselves.
Okay.
So the
Let's
fact that
go
the
with that
United States supports Israel as a democracy, and because there is a large lobby from Jewish people into Israel, and because of the the English UK genesis of Israel in the late 19th century, early 20th century,
Mm-hmm.
the U.S. is aligned politically with Israel, and that has led to a lot of treaties and things like that. That's separate from the philosophy,
Okay.
right?
All right.
So I'd say those in the United States that support Israel strongly also agree with Israel's philosophies and policies,
Okay.
at least in so much that they want to support them over somebody else.
Okay. So tell us more about those papers or philosophies that you're talking about that
Well,
relate
so
to Israel, Palestine, and Iran.
so the Israeli policy is that Israel has desired to create an Israeli state, which is open for Israeli immigration. So Jews from all the world should have a home in Israel. That is what the Israeli state was built to become. As the Jewish people were being persecuted in Europe and throughout the world, that they'd have a safe place to escape from. Clearly, mass immigration into another region that didn't have those people is going to cause problems. It causes problems all over the world. It's a major source of conflict. And so Israel also, in their founding documents, states that Israel is a place for all religions, for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and other religions. And so the Israeli documents really are for free elections, are for democracy, and leave religious freedom in their documents.
Okay. Okay.
So Palestine and Hamas came out of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And the founding documents for Hamas are state, and we can look those up, that they do believe in the existence of all religions, but those religions need to be under Muslim rule.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has led to a lot of issues because Hamas will not accept either an independent secular state or a Jewish state or a Christian state. They will only accept a Muslim state in control of the region. And so as part of that, as part of their founding documents, they have a policy which calls for the eradication of the Israeli state. Likewise, Iran also has in their founding documents that their country's policy is the eradication of the Israeli state. And so when you have foundational documents like that is the policy of an entire country, when those countries go and attack, or in Iran's position, provide military support, provide funding for these organizations, and it becomes a situation where they attack a state that has a stated goal of open freedom of religion, democracy, that is a very clear philosophical difference in opinion. And
Mhm.
so my position is, at least from a philosophical difference, the battles between the philosophies, that the Israeli position is one that I would prefer to have in the world. I prefer to have an open, secular society that is free to all religions. I really disagree with any country that believes that their national policy is the eradication of another country.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And you laid it out really well. Thank you for doing that.
No
This is
problem.
like a very balanced presentation of the issue that I think is kind of missing in a lot of the um, discussions of this. Would you say, though, that there's a difference, like you said, there's a difference between the philosophy and then the implementation, right? The
Absolutely.
abstract idea or the ideal, and then the reality of what's going on. And so, do you think there's any contradiction between Israel's philosophy? Like philosophically, they're like, oh yeah, we're so democratic, but like for example, might they actually want to wipe out the Palestinian state or the Palestinians? They want to get rid of them, but they can't say that in their documents. But if an opportunity arose to give them justification to do so, they would absolutely do it. Do you think that could be what's happening here?
No, I don't think that it's Israel's policy to wipe out the Palestinian state or wipe out the Palestinian people. I think it is Israel's policy to wipe out uh, the political organization that has stated that their purpose is to destroy the nation of Israel and implement a Islamic rule over all the peoples in Israel.
Okay. And so why are there so many? Because obviously there's not 40,000 people that are involved in that political organization. So with the number of deaths,
Yeah.
especially in proportion to their population, how can you justify that? And without making the conclusion that they're just trying to get rid of these people. They just want to wipe these people out off the land so they can have the land, they can expand their own state, and they can get rid of their problem of what they see as their problem, what they see as their enemy. Because I do think they see the Palestinians as a threat. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing this. So
Well,
they're the enemy, and they want to get rid of the enemy, right? How do you see that?
well,
Like,
so I would hesitate to add in things like want to take territory, want to subdue the Palestinian state. Right? Israel has agreed to a two state solution, right? And like I said, may have been implemented well or not, but Israel did give up land that they had secured in wars to the Palestinian people to create the Palestinian state. They moved Israelis out of those territories so the Palestinians could have their state. The big reason why there's a mixing between Hamas as the governing organization and Palestinian state has been the way that Hamas has governed. And one of the things that you see Hamas doing is Hamas has, because they have access to the schools and education, Hamas is training children very, very young and the population on this doctrine of eradication of the Israeli population. And so you see children having, and as low as kindergarten, having plays and having, the fun school activities where they're dressed up in suicide bomber outfits with guns and weapons, and they're singing songs about eradicating Jews,
mhm.
right? You see Hamas as the governing organization putting laws against gays and lesbians and defenestrating, throwing them off the top of buildings as a just punishment for being gay and lesbian,
Okay,
right?
but with all that being said, the that can't justify that couldn't possibly justify the number of civilian deaths that have taken place in Gaza.
Yes.
And so at what point, at what point do you say Israel is trying to genocide these people? I mean, at what, like, is it a matter like how can their violent actions and their nonstop pursuit of these people, even when they're in like refugee camps and stuff, how do you like when is this going to stop? I mean, Or do they
So
just
we
have carte blanche because of this attack on October 7th? Like, do you see what I'm saying?
we need to make a distinction between acts in war and acts before war, right? The decision to conduct violence, and especially the decision to conduct war, is a shift in policy. And so I just want to talk a little bit about like Israel's position um, on being attacked and defending themselves. And Israel is a nuclear state. Israel has nuclear weapons. Um, and that is a significant factor in this. And the reason why Israel pursued nuclear weapons is because they have a policy that if attacked, they're going to neutralize the threat very violently, because they're surrounded by countries and organizations that are either explicitly have stated they want to eradicate Israel, or are being funded, terrorist organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, they're being funded by mostly Iran with the stated goal of wiping out Israel. And so when they when they are attacked, Israel, and this is not in war, though you could say that Israel has been at war for many, many years. But outside, in actions other than war, is the way it's talked about, they will respond with not just proportionate force, but they will respond to eliminate the threat. And so it's kind of like it's the equivalent of if a bully comes up and punches you, Israel's not going to punch them back in the same force. Israel's going to punch them and knock them out so that they can't continue fighting. Because for Israel, it doesn't do them any good to punch with the same force as long as the opposition can punch you back, right? And so the selection of force by Israel as a policy has always been to provide greater force than what was given to them in order to eliminate the threat.
Is this sort of philosophy of like actions after war, is that written down anywhere? Like how do you know that's their official view of things?
Yeah, there's a Israeli national defense strategy that you can go look into. I haven't actually read it. However, these are military policies that are fairly well known. And
Sorry, not by me.
I'm,
But
I'm just saying that
okay.
if we go back in history and look at Israeli
Yeah.
responses in the Sinai to Egypt, in fact, that's where the policy came out of, was the war with Egypt. Was the 7-Day War, or I can't remember how many days it was.
Okay. Okay.
But um, Egypt invaded Israeli boundaries. Israel attacked, and what looked like it was going to be a prolonged war was actually extremely short, because Israel just went in and completely devastated the enemy so that they couldn't fight anymore. And
Okay.
that worked really well for Israel. And so that became sort of a national policy. And so Israel maintains the ability to respond not just with proportional force, but with overwhelming force.
Okay. And you said the point then is to eliminate the enemy once they respond. Once they're engaged in war, it's like they want to eliminate the enemy.
They want to eliminate the adversary's ability to conduct violence against them.
Okay. So as long as there's an adversary alive, they could potentially conduct violence against them.
Not necessarily. So the capability.
If they're like
So
if they're like locked away in like a camp behind a wall, like aren't allowed to leave, like just keep them
so
trapped.
now we're talking about civilian deaths versus military objectives, right? And so let's shift into the decision to go to war, and let's talk about decisions within war.
Okay. Yeah. Tell me
Because
more about that.
because um, and this is really the controversial portion, and this is the portion that we often don't want to debate, right? And that is, once the decision is made to go to war and violence is authorized, justified, and legal, right? And this is a real distinction. A lot of people are like, don't look at, right?
Mhm.
Internationally, it is legal to go to war. And when you go to war, you make a declaration of war, it is legal to kill people. And in fact, it is legal to have civilian casualties as long as you minimize those civilian casualties to the greatest extent possible, right?
Mhm.
And that minimize civilian casualties is a fairly new entry into war that came in after the firebombing of Dresden in World War II and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right?
Mhm.
We decided that using civilians as targets to influence the actions of a nation was not something internationally we wanted in war.
Okay.
And that's very difficult because you have to create a different set of weapons and different set of tactics in order to protect civilian lives. And when you look and really this new doctrine actually came at post Vietnam. In Vietnam, we still had some World War II tactics, right? If we just look at the US influence. We were, we were dropping incendiary bombs, we were burning the forest, we were, killing mass casualties. And it didn't really change the outcome of the Vietnam War. And so the US, in something called the second offset strategy, decided that they were going to focus on precision munitions and precision strike. So instead of having weapons that would affect large areas, which would include civilian populace, they developed things like the Tomahawk missile, right? And so the Tomahawk missile and Tomahawk missile, GPS, all of these things were designed so that we could pick a target and put a weapon onto a target, right? And with that came decision making of how to minimize civilian casualties in a much, much more in-depth way.
Okay.
I'll pause there. I threw a lot out there.
Yeah, no, this is good. So once, okay, so Israel has this philosophy and their documents, their national defense strategy is that once they are attacked, they can basically do anything
No, they
to
can't do
live.
anything.
Okay, so what is governing in terms of philosophies, what is governing their actions? Like, does the UN international law come into play, or do they just completely disregard that?
So I couldn't tell you which conventions Israel is a part of right now, off the top of my head.
Okay.
I know Israel generally follows the Geneva Conventions,
Okay.
right? The UN does not actually have enforcement ability.
Right. But they have the philosophy. Like they have the
So this is the thing. So this UN in Iraq, and they can write strongly worded letters.
okay.
And so for example, between the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War, Saddam Hussein was taking the aid packages that were negotiated and were given to him by the UN, and he was funneling them into his own pockets. And then he also, because there is a divide between the Sunni and Shia, right, where the populace in the southern part of Iraq was largely like Iranian type, Iranian source religion, and the people up north were a different religion. So Saddam Hussein not only didn't give aid to the people in the south, but he cut off the dams to those people in the south, causing mass starvation,
Mhm.
right? All of these things were against what the UN said, and the UN went in and all the UN was able to do was send strongly worded letters. So UN itself is an organization without teeth, and it's very much a political organization.
Mhm.
And generally, in the conduct of war, when war is happening, the UN's resolutions are heard and listened to, but do not have any sort of legal weight behind them.
Right. Right.
Much like the League of Nations before NATO was established. The League of
Mhm.
Nations also tried to prevent war, but had no framework or standing army to be able to enforce those.
Okay.
So the UN the UN, in the conduct of war, when war is going out, has no ability to force a country to do something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The worst they can do is provide, set up economic sanctions between the member states.
Okay. When you were, so you said that Israel doesn't believe in responding with proportional force, that they will respond with more aggression in order to subdue the enemy. And I suppose the rationale behind that is like you want to stop the war and the fighting as soon as possible, so you might as well just go all in. Is that right? Is that sort of
There's
related to
a
like, yeah,
there's
go
a
ahead.
difference between going all in and eliminating a populace and responding with overwhelming force. So Israel still responds with force to eliminate the objective and eliminate the threat. Once the threat is eliminated, then Israel stops.
Okay. So when is that? I mean,
So
is they just get to make that call and define that at the
yes,
okay.
actually, in the
Okay.
conduct of war, those states that are at war are making decisions about the proportionality. After the war happens, we have courts and we have tribunals to see if they did follow the laws of war, and those people can be subject to it. I mean, you saw the international courts, issued arrest warrants for several people involved in this conflict. But again, they can't do anything within Israel. It's a political body. It's kind of a nothing sandwich, um, because countries have the inherent right to self-defense and the inherent right to conduct war. Russia has the inherent right to invade Ukraine if they think that there is an issue, and Ukraine has the inherent right to defend themselves against Russia, right?
Mhm.
Um, we may disagree. We may say Russia is not justified going and doing that. We may say that Ukraine, was not justified in the Donbas region, right? But on that really has nothing to say about the decisions between two countries to go to war.
Okay. Um, for those of you who are listening, who are my normal listeners, if you're interested in this conversation about what we're having, go listen to episode 45 and 46 after this one, okay? Because it's this lesson that I gave on from Oedipus Rex. Okay, so there's this classic line in Sophocles where Oedipus is on this road. This is when he kills. The story of Oedipus is that he kills his father, he marries his mother. When he kills his father, there's this great line by Sophocles that says, they did something, they like hit Odysseus or something. And it says, or not Odysseus, Oedipus. And the line by Sophocles says that he was going to make them pay with interest for their temerity. And
Hmm.
this is the way violence works, right? And this seems to be what you're describing, Jason, is that there is no such thing as proportional violence. Like you slap
Right.
me, I turn around and slap you.
Yeah.
And what happens in this scene with Odysseus, there's like a carriage, there's the king, his father, there's a driver, and there's like some other guy in the carriage, and he ends up killing everybody there. It escalates to the point because he has to, because he cannot leave a single person left who can get revenge on him. And so this is coming to mind as Jason is talking. I mean, we can talk all day long about Catholic just war theory, but this is the reality of war, and this is the reality of violence. And sometimes I think someone like Jason, even though Jason, you're not Catholic. I don't know if you still consider yourself, a
I
Christian.
consider myself Christian. I was raised Episcopalian, Catholic
Yeah.
white.
Yeah. But sometimes it's like I could listen all day to Jason talk about this because at least I feel like you're coming from a real world perspective. Whereas so many of the conversations we have as Catholics about war, it's totally divorced from reality. And so, speaking of proportional violence, what about it? What about in the United States? I mean, is our national security strategy that we always have to use proportional violence, or how do we feel about that? I don't actually know what our
Yeah.
official stand is.
So our national security strategy states that we will And I'm going to paraphrase. And these are all documents that you can download. I highly recommend pulling down the National Security Strategy and National Defense Strategy. But it states that, we will become the dominant power and we will maintain dominance over our potential adversaries because that creates what's called an offset, right? If we have an offset where we can do so much violence to this other country that we can completely wipe out their ability to conduct war, and I'll talk about why you conduct war and do violence in a second. But our policy is to be so dominant that our adversaries don't want to go to war with us. And if we do go to war, we establish dominance quickly. Now, in action.
And can I just break in real quick? There is a certain logic there if you're trying to preserve peace in making it so that no one wants to go to war with you. You could call that a kind of peace. I mean, in a worldly perspective, I don't think that's not a Christian perspective of looking at peace, but you can understand why people might adopt that.
Well, if we look at the principle of mutually assured destruction in nuclear warfare, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mostly between the U.S. and Russia, and also China now as the dominant powers that have nuclear weapons. Many other countries have nuclear weapons now: France, Pakistan, India. But this concept that if you launch a nuclear weapon, you are assured to destroy your country has actually assured peace. There's not been a nuclear attack, thank God, since Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And yet we have the possibility, if one of these countries decides to completely destroy the world. That's an extreme example. However, we can take it down to just the schoolyard bully, right? The schoolyard bully is perfectly happy walking around and punching somebody, right? Mm-hmm. And if somebody comes back and punches them, he's gonna have overwhelming force. If bullies don't pick the biggest kid on the school, they pick the smallest kid, right? And so that principle goes from the individual all the way up to nation states. When it comes to violence, being the biggest, the strongest is a deterrent towards violence being done against you.
Yes. And perhaps for my listeners, this is why Jesus said, not as the world gives it to you, do I give you peace. Like, this is the world. This is how the world assures peace. So is this what Jesus was saying or not? I'm just want you guys to be thinking about this. So like, I have so many follow-up questions here. Okay. So yeah, when you went into, when you were, fighting, here's a question. When you were fighting in the 2000s, maybe you didn't give it much thought, because I assume you were like 22 years old. And I know the development of my intellectual and mental capacity when I was 22 was not very good. But then again, you did prank your whole school. So you were smarter than me. I would never been able to figure out how to do that. But, when you were there and actually a young kid fighting, like, did you believe that you were fighting to defend the United States? Because these were invasions, they were invasive wars, and we were fighting in other countries. So kind of like the definition of defense is like you're fighting on your own territory because you're like defending your territory. But I'm just wondering, in your mind, what were you doing over there? Or did you just think, you know what, I signed up to do a job. This is what I'm supposed to do, so I'm going to do it.
Yeah. Let's dive into a little more philosophy, right? So
all right, but I'm going to get you to answer a personal question eventually.
I'm going to answer the personal question because it's a personal belief that I have that underwrites how I feel about this. So, one of the foundations of the U.S. Constitution is that it's a social contract between the people of the United States and the government of the United States. And the Constitution, the basis of it before the Bill of Rights, only had a few things that the government was supposed to do, right? The government could have a legal system and try people, right? Because you don't want individuals trying each other. It could regulate interstate commerce. It could build post offices. It could raise an army,
Coin
right?
money. Did you get coin money?
Coin money. I didn't get coin money. No,
Yeah,
thank
coin
you.
money. Yeah.
There's I'm not gonna be a constitutional scholar here. We'll do that different rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But let's focus on the raise an army, right?
Okay.
And part of this is raise a police force too, right? So police force is internal and military is external. So if there was not a contract between the government to raise an army, then each person would have to defend themselves individually from outside organizations, right? And there's examples in history where
Sure.
that works, right? In England, all the lords would have their own standing army, and the king would call the lords and bring the armies together when it was a battle, and then would disperse them, right? You
Right.
don't
So
have to
whatever you have a
stand.
right to do individually, you have a right to do collectively.
Right.
It extends. Yeah.
So the reason why we call it service when we talk about military and other things in the government is because you are serving in that social contract role, right? And so when the country asks you to go and defend, you go and defend, right? And because of the way our Constitution is set up, the political powers that be, Congress has the authority to declare war. The president executes combat operations, and we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of conflicts less than war and declaration of wars in the past couple of wars. But in generally that is the case. So what I was doing was I was serving in that role under that social contract. And so my role was to go out there and fight the war. And I needed to trust that those military and political leaders were putting me in a just war and were directing me towards the right thing and were establishing rules. I followed rules. I followed rules of engagement while I was out there. And in Afghanistan, I followed the rules of engagement. And those rules of engagement changed based upon what happened on the ground. So I don't know anybody personally that was there because of political reasons. They
Sure.
were there because your role in the military is to serve the role of defending your country, and you go where and when the country needs you, because that is the social contract.
Okay. Yeah. Is it fair? I don't know. Is it fair to say, like you were talking about these, like the aristocrats need to be free from the need to work, and like the workers need to be free from the need to think. I mean, is it fair to say that soldiers or people in the military who are not making the plans at the political level need to be free not to think? Like that's part of it
The
being
se-
in the military
the-
is like you are supposed to obey and not think.
Here's
And
the
I know
interesting thing.
I hope you're
No,
not insulted by that.
here's the interesting thing about the U.S. military, right? And the Germans complained about this in World War II, is that the Germans had doctrine and followed their doctrine. The U.S. had doctrine, but didn't necessarily follow their own doctrine. One of the critical things that the U.S. has that other militaries are trying to emulate, including China, is the senior enlisted corps, right? So what you have is you have your enlisted folks, and those are the younger people. Those are the people you usually think of as grunts. They go out, take orders, go out and shoot, right? But it's your middle enlisted people. You have enlisted people who are what are called staff officers, right? Or non-commissioned officers, and they are given authority and additional authority to make decisions in the battlefield. And so they can restrain those soldiers from doing things. They can make decisions on the battlefield. Those decisions used to be held only by officers. And in many militaries now, those decisions are still held only by officers sitting in air-conditioned rooms and getting orders through radios. The US, one of the critical things the US did was push that decision-making capability down. And one of the things that is required to have that is you have to have a highly educated military force. And so the US military, those folks going to war are educated on the Geneva Conventions. They're educated on rules of engagement. They're educated on how to care for people, right? So let's take something like Abu Ghraib, right? where U.S. soldiers took over a military jail
Mm-hmm.
and abused the prisoners, right? Unfortunately, during wartime, there in any large group of people, there will be bad actors, and there will be bad actors in bad situations, right?
Sure.
We can look at the psychology of prison and the prisoner's dilemma in civilian, like that's basically what happened was the prisoner's dilemma, where the jailers ended up exerting power in undue ways. But those people got punished, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those people were found out, those people went to jail because they violated it. So the US does go in.
How would they get find out? Was that part of the Bradley Manning thing? Did he expose
It
that?
was not. It was in
No.
and it was there was leakers, but it was not the Bradley Manning thing.
Oh, okay. There were leakers though. Okay.
Well, more like reporters. Like we have people going around doing inspections. When they found when they went and did the inspection of Abu Ghraib, they
Okay.
found really despicable conditions, and they corrected for it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's horrible that it happened. However, um, you know, the sign of a just society is when wrongs do occur, that those wrongs are righted.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Um, yeah. Sorry. Did you want to continue that thought or did I interrupt you?
I'm good in the Abu Ghraib, but we can keep going down this path, but I could use another question to jumpstart.
Okay, final question. Because we've covered a lot of territory. And okay, so you told me to read this book On Killing, which I had been meaning to read for a while. I already had it in my library, and so I was like, okay, I should read this. There's this chapter 3, there's this chapter called The Entrapment of Atrocity. So maybe just to bring it back full circle to like what we started out talking about when we originally started talking about this,
Yeah.
the anti-Semitism thing or whatever. Let me just read this passage and then maybe we can just wrap up by talking about this. Despite its short-term benefits, atrocity as policy is normally but not always self-destructive. Unfortunately, this self-destruction usually does not occur in time to save its immediate victims. The process of bonding men by forcing them to commit an atrocity requires a foundation of legitimacy for it to continue for any length of time. The authority of a state, as in Stalinist Russia, Nazi Germany, or Ba'athist Iraq, a state religion, as in the emperor worship of Imperial Japan or the blah, 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 a heritage of barbarism and cruelty that diminishes the value of human life, and economic pressures combined with years of prior experience and group bonding are all examples of varying forms of legitimizing factors that can ensure the continuing commission of atrocities. They also, however, contain seeds of their own destruction. Once a group undergoes the process of bonding and empowerment through atrocity, its members are entrapped in it, as it turns every other force that is aware of their nature against them. Of course, those who commit atrocities understand that what they are doing will be considered criminal by the rest of the world. And this is why, at the level of nation states, they attempt to control their population and their press. And I'm just wondering if that's why this Anti-Semitism Awareness Act has come about, because they know that what they're doing is considered an atrocity by most of the world, and they need to try to control the discussion of it. Controlling people and knowledge is only a stopgap measure, particularly as ubiquitous electronic communication becomes widely available. So it's hard to keep a lid on it, but I think people kind of do recognize that this is some kind of atrocity. Once you are attacked, you don't have carte blanche, just do whatever you want. And I know that kind of brings it back to like what we've already discussed, but I just thought that might be a way of bringing it full circle. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah. So I think I disagree with your statement that Israel has carte blanche to do whatever they want.
Well,
Um,
okay.
and so I
Okay.
think that what you just described there describes Hamas and the current state of the Palestinian Authority much more than it describes Israel. Because you listed off Imperial Japan, you listed off Nazi Germany, you listed off the Shahs in Iran.
Right.
Those, in fact, this is direct influence from Iran into that area. You have a political power who is stated purpose is to wipe a country off the map, and has been indoctrinating their entire country, their civilian populace, into this methodology. And so when Hamas attacked Israel, right, what you end up having is you have a situation where the atrocities will continue until that threat is eliminated. And so from the position of Israel, and I'm not looking at the global position, right? From the position of Israel, they have to wipe out Hamas, and they have to wipe out that entire mindset that is going on, right? So here's the complicated situation. There is now not a line between the philosophy of Hamas and the philosophy of a lot of the people, because the people have been taught and brought up into this violent way of acting. And so Israel's in a very difficult position that if they stop, the violence and the atrocities will continue. And so this is really back to the On Killing book and back to what we've talked about. Once the decision is to conduct violence, the decision to conduct violence is when diplomacy and other things have not worked. And really, there was a quote I heard, and I don't know who I would attribute it to, but it really is. The question was, hey, do you support the way that Al-Qaeda is treating people in Afghanistan, treating women in Afghanistan? And the person talking about this said, well, you know what? I personally don't agree with it, but that's the way that their country has decided to do it, right? And my option is to either allow them to keep doing it, right? Or I have to come in with violence and stop them from doing it. Because that's how they decided to organize their society. Mm-hmm. If it is so abhorrent that I can't even think about that existing in the world, then my only option to stop that is violence. And this is where the death penalty, a lot of our different violent acts in society come from. And so what I think that you're seeing here is that the conduct of Hamas in particular, and especially Hamas in training their society to hate Israel and their deliberate and express purpose of wiping Israel off the map, is so abhorrent to the Israeli population that they have made the decision to do violence. And in that decision, violence, and this is the decision of violence, violence should continue until that threat is eliminated. Because if violence does not continue until that threat is eliminated, this is the same thing as the bully being able to punch you back. They will just come back again and again. And I'll put one more thing. The Afghanistan war went on for 20 years, right? Mm-hmm. The rule for the US was proportionality. They hit us, we had to hit them back proportionally. The long wars that you see, especially the US entering into, where there's proportionality, really leads to a long sustained engagement. And there's an argument to be made that long sustained engagements over time actually do more violence and kill more people than short, hot engagements. Now, that's not to say you should go in and firebomb and wipe out the entire civilian populace, right? We still should have discretion. We should, in the conduct of war, we should have discretion. We should be trying to minimize civilian deaths. However, any country has the right to self-defense and to eliminate a threat to themselves in the international law. And so the argument that I would make is that Israel is in its right to conduct violence until the threat is eliminated. And then we make a judgment on whether that was a just proportional use of force, and whether Hamas or Israel are doing things that are abhorrent to the rest of society. I would say under that theory, right? We have a lot of people going out and protesting. We have people shutting down subways, standing in front of roads, right? We have nonviolent actions that are taking place to convince things like the UN to write strongly worded letters, or the international courts to issue arrest warrants. If you believe that Israel's actions are so abhorrent that they should not exist in the world, your action that you have to take, the end state of this, is that you will need to take violent action against Israel. If you're not willing to take violent action against Israel, then you have to accept that Israel is going to do things differently than the way you may want to do them.
Well, I mean, but it sounds like you're saying that they have to conduct violence and killing until the threat is eliminated. And at the same time, you're saying all the kids have been brainwashed to hate Jews. So they got to kill all the kids now? Like, I mean, what's the end point of that? Where do you
Well,
stop?
if you eliminate their ability to conduct war, if you eliminate their ability to access weapons, you eliminate, their ability to conduct war,
How do you do
right?
that though?
You go building by building, and you eliminate the caches of war, caches in the buildings. You eliminate the people who are planning operations. And the problem with Hamas is it mixes their military in with civilian populations. They put their caches of weapons under hospitals and under mosques, under places, and this is in violation of Geneva Conventions, under places of civilian populace, um, in order to cause, um, in order to protect their military forces using their civilian population. And so what Israel is doing is doing very, very dangerous military operations to go in and minimize civilian casualties in those places. And so Israel is going in and putting people in places where, based upon our previous thing of precision weaponry, right, where they could have just bombed it and wiped out a military target and wiped out military equipment. Instead, they're going in and having to differentiate between civilians and military population. And again, that's very muddy now because of the way that Hamas has trained their society, right? And to be fair, Israel also has, every single person in Israel after they reach 18 serves time in the military. So going into Israel, you also have the same mixing of the military and civilian population. So it would cause a similar problem if there was an invasion into Israel for another country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, I want to find a quote, but I don't know where it is. I think it's behind me somewhere, and I don't want to keep you too much longer, but this has been very illuminating. Thank you for your thoughts on all this.
My pleasure.
Yeah, this is good. I think this is good for my audience to hear. I think you bring a very realistic, real world perspective to all of this. And we need to think about that, like how this actually works in the real world. And yeah, do you have, yeah, go ahead.
I'd ask your listeners to sort of differentiate your thoughts on death pre-war, right, and killing pre-war. And this is what the On Killing book is about. After the decision to kill, what are the effects, positive and negative? And to really think about what are the actions once killing happens. Though there are different decisions that are made there, and there are pathways out of killing. However, those same pathways and those same decisions that you'd make to have peace in pre-war are not the same decisions you can make when violence is broken out.
Right. Yeah, in the just war theory, like the Catholic teaching is like you have to have both sides. You have to have a just cause for war, and then you also have to conduct the war according to certain principles. So you have to meet certain criteria in order to go to war, but then once you're engaged in war, you have to carry it out a certain way. and it sounds like what you're saying is that if one was to carry it out according to the just war theory, which by the way, no war is ever carried out according to that. And I think that might come down to what you pointed out in the difference between philosophy and implementation. I think it's one thing you can talk all day long about your principles, but in the heat of the moment, and that's what a lot of what this book is about, is in the heat of the moment. When you're in battle, you're not always thinking about the rules, and there's psychological and emotional and
Mhm.
spiritual, I would say, reasons for that.
Yeah.
Um, and Simone Weil wrote about that when she wrote about the Iliad. She talked about how to expect moderation in the use of violence would require, what'd she say? Moderation in the use of violence would require almost an inhuman dignity and weakness. And what she meant is that most people aren't going to be able to carry out and use violence in moderation, according to these logical rules.
Yeah.
Unless maybe you're like sitting in an office, controlling a drone somewhere. I don't know.
There's a follow-up book called On Drones that goes into that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so I would say there's no such thing as a kind war, and there shouldn't be. War should be abhorrent, war should be horrible, war should be extremely violent, and it should be extremely short. Because it's not something we as humans should ever want to do, and we should never want to sustain it. And so our concepts of going in and conducting war with a minimum level of violence and a minimum level of effect actually are counterproductive to the conduct of war, right? War should be something we never, ever want to do. And when we conduct war, we should never, ever want to do it again. It has significant impacts on the economics, as of course the killing. There's an entire generation. I live in Croatia. They just came out of a war. The entire country knows what war is. The children know what war is. The people who've gone through war come out with scars, whether it's the civilian population, right? The civilians sitting in Ukraine right now, the Palestinian people, the children of the Israelis. This is a horrible, horrible, awful thing. And we have to say, how are we going to conduct ourselves in a horrible, horrible, awful thing? And what I would put out there is that, unfortunately, our desire to constrain our ability to do violence after the decision to do violence actually leads to more violence and worse outcomes than going in and conducting violence in a short, violent, horrible, horrible way.
I think maybe in the short term, that's true, because you do debilitate the enemy. You take away their ability to strike back or whatever. But I also think that plants the seeds of future conflict, because those people don't forget. And that just, I disagree with you on that, but I do think that's probably a good place to
Uh,
end.
I'll throw it in there. If you go to Germany today, or you go to Japan today, right? The conflicts that we have right now are very, very small and limited in scope compared to the world wars. Those countries were decimated. Their economies were decimated. And after that, the decimation of those countries, those countries, the US leading the way, went back in and reconstructed those countries. And now Japan and Germany are some of the leading industrial nations in the world. They have extremely wealthy populations. They have people who know war. They teach the war in their societies, and that is the outcome of a completed war.
Maybe, but
The
they're dying because they're not having any babies.
Well, that's a different decision.
I don't know if that's so different. I don't know. I don't
That's
know. It'd be interesting to think about what the relationship is, but they're not getting married. They're not having babies. They're like going to have to. Japan has always been very like anti-immigration. They're going to have to start like importing people to maintain their population, and then it won't be Japan anymore. And Germany's not going to be Germany anymore either. It's going to be something else. So I don't know that you can say that Germany survived. And I think that the way we treated Germany after World War One, I mean, that led directly to World War Two. And so
Did.
this complete annihilation and defeat of the enemy, I'm just not sure I agree with you on that, because I think it does plant the seed for future conflict. And you can say that we have some kind of peace through strength by maintaining this these nuclear weapons and no one would ever use them. But like, I do think that's very short-sighted, because it hasn't even been 100 years since we developed those weapons. And in the long-term look at human history, it's like we all know we're going to use them again. It's going to happen. And so it's like, to say this is peace when we were just sitting there, we're like in the guillotine waiting for the like, it's very peaceful when you're waiting for the knife to fall, but that's kind of where we are now. That's where this mentality and it's not that has gotten us. And so this is a Catholic podcast, and so we talk a lot about like what did Jesus say, and how does that, is this the kind of peace that Jesus wanted for us? I don't know. I don't think, I mean, I know it's not, but that's where
This
we are.
is,
And that's this human situation. And it goes back to the beginning, and
we
it's
are
very
currently
hard to
in
get
one of the
people.
most
Yeah.
prosperous, peaceful times in human history, which should scare the living heck out of everybody. But we are, right? In Jesus' time, there were wars all over that were horrific. The Crusades were horrific. The um, the Communist Revolution in Russia and the Communist Revolution in China killed many, many more people uh, than the World Wars did. Millions upon millions of people. We're not living in a time where millions of people are dying, where entire populations are being wiped out.
I do, right. But I think that if you like, there's this video that this Japanese artist made of it shows the map of the world, and it shows every time a new country starts building nuclear weapons. And it's got this like, and it's just like ding, ding, ding,
Mhm.
ding. And then it has a counter at the top of the number of tests and explosions and bombs that are built. And it's just like, when you step back and you look at the big picture, I don't think we can call this peace. I don't think we can call it, this is a lull. And I feel like, but this is my melancholic nature, is like this, it's just a peaceful lull before it's like the quiet before the storm. And we're like,
And
we're like on the brink of World War III, thanks to Israel.
thanks to both Russia, Iran, Israel, Hamas, China's potential belligerence with Taiwan, right? We can't put it on Israel itself. And let's not forget that Hamas was the one that did the attack on Israel. And so it is not just we are what the norm of society, and this is where I really disagree with you. You're looking and saying it's not normal that we're fighting, right?
No, no, no. I never said that. I never said that.
Peace is not normal for humanity. I hope for peace. And so my conversation is not that I
I never
want,
said it was normal. I think it's very
yeah,
normal. It's very
I,
normal. Yeah.
I think that we are in a lull, which is actually abnormal when it
Mhm.
comes to this.
That's what I
But
was saying. So we agree with that. Yeah.
I agree with you. I guess I'm a little pessimistic on their ability to our ability to find peace when human beings have never found peace in their 40,000 years of history. And so, how do we build a society that can both um, build prosperity for most people, build peace for the most people,
Mhm.
create the longest lulls between conflict, make conflict as short as possible and as decisive as possible so that we can get back into a peaceful time. And if we can maximize the number of lulls that we have, for me, I think that's the greatest that we can hope. And unfortunately, that doesn't align with, a lot of uh, people who want peace. It's good to want peace. But now let's step back and say, what is the true nature of human beings, right? And as we talked about in the beginning, human beings will fall far from the ideal.
Yeah.
So we should always strive for the ideal, but we should understand that we're dealing with human beings and we're all imperfect, which
Hmm.
is Catholic doctrine, by the way,
Wait, what do you mean?
that we're human beings and therefore are imperfect, and we are inherently sinners,
Yes.
and we will fall from grace, and we need forgiveness.
But Jesus says, go and be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect.
And I support this podcast because your goal is to make the world a more perfect, more peaceful place.
No,
And you,
my goal is not to do that. My goal is to save souls. Do you believe in the soul?
well, it's
But
depends on where the soul,
we
depends on
had a
where the soul is
conversation once
attached.
about where it was attached to the body.
Where's the soul attached? That determines whether I believe in the soul or not, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
Okay,
it on
so
the forehead, right? Is it like throughout your whole body?
yeah.
Really?
But does your Christian faith play into any of these ideas about war and violence? Or do you feel like you really do have to kind of bracket out this issue of war and just not even think about it?
Well, I specifically didn't talk about my faith and Christian perspectives on this because I wanted to talk about how the world is organized right now based upon how human beings have shaped the nature of warfare and the nature of political conflict. I also I also push back strongly against the idea of putting one's own beliefs, Christian beliefs, onto another society and believing that the way that I feel about something, according to my religion, is the way that another group should feel about something,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so this discussion has been largely not a religious discussion. This is just what it is. However, a lot of the doctrine and the philosophy that we have talked about have come from Greek philosophy, have come from Christian doctrine on war, have come from um,
Mm-hmm.
the Catholic Church. But we also need to look at how the Islamic Church teaches warfare, right?
Mm-hmm.
How Eastern religions look at warfare, right? China has a view of millennia, right? Um, they don't fight hot wars. They fight really long, protracted, 400-year conflicts. Um, uh, the Islamic people believe that all Muslims are soldiers for their religion, and so their ability to recruit their populace to fight for them, as you see in Gaza, is a part of the religion,
Mm-hmm.
right? Christians are more aligned, especially in Catholicism, are more aligned to that sort of the republic view, where there is a societal organization where you have people who make decisions, and then you have the populace, and the people in the decision making, the philosopher kings will decide when and where those people will go, and that's what you see in Western Christian societies is you see a governing group that decides when other people go fight.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I need to go take a hike. I need to get
You,
outside.
you should take a hike. We should pause this. Happy to come back and talk about
Yeah.
anything else if you
Yeah.
decide.
So for those of you who are listening, this is a little bit off the beaten track of what we usually do, but I've really enjoyed this conversation. When you comment on YouTube, you better be charitable because this is my podcast and I can impose my values on my channel. So you better be charitable. You better be respectful of Jason because he's my friend. And also, I don't want any comments about the Jews that are like, if you want to criticize Israel, that's one thing, but just or at least if you're going to talk about the Jews, then be intelligent, okay? Don't be mean and don't be cruel, and otherwise I'm just going to delete your comment because I have that power. All right, so that's where we're going to end today. I felt like I had one more thing I wanted to say, but go to church tomorrow. You can go to church tomorrow.
Yeah, I think I am.
Okay, good.
My
I
church
don't.
is on top of a mountain. They built lots of mountains with crosses on top of them.
Well, you're from
In
Colorado,
fact,
so I would
a lot of the
expect you.
hikes A lot of the hikes here, it's a Catholic country. I
Yeah,
don't think I told your audience I live in Croatia.
yeah.
A lot of the hikes here actually have the way of the cross up the hike. So you can go to church and hike at the same time.
That is the way to do it. They've got it figured out. I fully support that. That's great. All right.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Jason. Thanks for your time. Thanks for all of your great insights. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the comments on YouTube. If you guys have comments or questions, if you want me to have Jason back and ask him questions, maybe we can do that sometime. But thanks a lot, Jason, and enjoy the rest of your night.
Thanks, Ellen. Thanks, everybody.